Hello, this is Pastor Don and Donna Long, and once again we welcome you to our discussion about Jewish roots. You know, the Apostle Paul does say that the Gentiles were grafted in to the root of Judaism, and so underneath our Christian faith. In fact, the only thing that makes our Christian faith valid is the fact that we are rooted in God's message, rooted in Torah, rooted into God's people. And last week, Donna, we were talking about answering the question, did the early believers who were Jews, did they stop going to the synagogue? And the corollary to that is, what about the Gentiles who likewise became believers? There's this image that one would have today that the Jewish people are here and the Christian people are here, and they're entirely two different religions.
That's right.
And many people, in fact, are shocked to find out Jesus was Jewish. His name was Yeshua.
Is Jewish.
His mother's name was Miriam. She was Jewish. And all the disciples were Jewish. But the early church was Jewish.
That the whole book that we rely on is Jewish.
It's a Jewish book. And the early church, in its first several hundred years, it was Jewish.
It was very Jewish.
They went to synagogue. We talked about that.
It was a Messianic Jewish establishment.
And so both Jew and Gentile believers in Yeshua, both of them went to the temple until the temple was destroyed.
That's right.
Both Jewish believers in Yeshua and Gentile believers in Yeshua went to the synagogue.
That's right.
Now, they had separate meetings as believers, but their separate meeting wasn't, we no longer go to the synagogue. It's that in addition, we have a special class that we want to learn things about. You could put it that way.
That's right.
And so the believers continued to attend the synagogue.
That's right.
Now, some people, when they hear that, maybe for the first few years.
Yeah.
But the truth is that as late as the 4th and 5th centuries, believers were continuing to attend the synagogue.
That's right.
In fact, John Chrysostom, who was a preacher at Antioch in Constantinople, complained in a series of sermons to his congregation. Now, this is what he preached to his congregation in the 4th and 5th centuries. You must stop going to the synagogue. You must not think the synagogue is a holier place than our church.
He had to have said that not just out of a vacuum, right? It's because they were. The synagogue was a vital part of their life and their existence. And he felt it was a competition, obviously, to the churches.
Well, in fact,
because of the life force coming
It was in the 300s that the Gentiles had taken over the church. By then it had just grown.
Yep.
And Gentiles who basically had no roots in the Bible, no roots in Torah, came out of pagan idolatry, came to faith, and they thought, here's what we wanted to do. And it was around 300, in the 300 AD period, that the Christian church took a decided turn away from Judaism and toward paganism and throughout the Jewish festivals that God said we are always to keep.
And forbid people from
and in fact then substituted pagan festivals like Easter and Christmas. They did not come out of the Bible. They came out of pagan festivals. And at the same time they said, okay, if you're going to be a Christian, you cannot go to the synagogue.
That's right.
And that thought continues today. But as I said, that's in the 300s when the church was really hijacked by the Gentiles.
That's right.
But even for up to 200 years after that, Christians who knew their Bible were still going to the synagogue. Both Jew and Gentile.
That's right.
So much so that some of the leading pastors of churches and preachers had to preach against it.
That's right.
In fact, it was in the 600s that the Pope had to issue a condemnation of priests still going to the synagogue. And they said, we will excommunicate any priest going to the synagogue or observing the Jewish holidays.
That's right.
Now, what was that impetus? What was keeping people rooted? It's the fact that they understood that we were grafted into the root. That's what the Apostle Paul said.
And they knew what they were being grafted into was Jewish.
That's right.
They knew that.
They knew that. And they could read their Bibles and it said, keep tabernacles forever. So just because some man said, we don't celebrate that anymore, well, the Bible says you're supposed to.
That's right.
So there were faithful believers up through 5-6 centuries of church history who still saw themselves connected to the Jewish roots. Now, by the way, throughout the church history, there's always been Gentile believers who saw their connection to their Jewish roots. Always been those believers,
right.
But by and large, after 600 AD, they became a decided minority. They were usually hounded out of the church. They were persecuted. They were
Well, and
killed.
they had to, if they were doing it, they had to hide that fact
Right,
because they were threatened. So
Well, I mean, many of them were still keeping Sabbath. And
secretly
because it was outlawed to keep
That's
Sabbath
right.
if
It
you were a
was.
Christian.
That's right.
But we are now in a day and age when across the world,
that's right. There's a great
all
awakening taking
denominations,
place. A great awakening.
and people are awakening to their Jewish
roots. That's right.
And we know that in Sweden, there's a large
yes.
church in Sweden, thousands of members who are deeply connected to their Jewish roots. You go to Korea, South Korea.
That's right.
I mean, thousands of Christians in South Korea with
And
a deep connection.
we're witness to that every time we go to Israel, aren't we?
That's right.
Large, thousands in the group that come to Israel, and they flock to Israel to visit the holy places,
Yeah.
And it's from Korea, it's from Sweden. It's just amazing. It's just
There's
amazing.
this resurgence, if you will.
Yes, it is.
And so the old idea that, well, if you're a Jew, you stay away from the church, and if you're a Christian, you can't go near the synagogue, and so if you're a Jew and you believe in Yeshua, you got to leave Judaism, and how can you leave your faith? I mean,
right.
Yeshua is Jewish.
How can you leave the very tree that you're supposed to be grafted into?
That's right. And so now this whole movement of Messianic Jews on one hand and Messianic Gentiles, we could say, on the other hand, coming back. So again, one of the questions that gets asked is, did the early believers stop the observance of the Jewish Sabbaths and feasts?
Only under great threat of their life.
Well,
but the early ones didn't.
The early ones did. Let me share some things with you. Origen, who was a leader in the church from 185 to 254 AD, here's what he wrote. Quote, "After the festival of the crucifixion, Passover, is put the festival of the Sabbath, and it is fitting for whoever is righteous among the saints to keep also the festival of the Sabbath." So Origen, a great bishop leader of the early church, is saying we keep Passover in remembrance of the crucifixion, and right after that, in terms of importance, comes Sabbath.
That's right.
And so he talks about the importance, not of Sunday, but of the Sabbath on Saturday.
That's right.
Here's a man, Socrates Scholasticus, in the 4th century. Quote, "For although almost all churches throughout the world celebrate the Lord's Supper on the Sabbath of every week, yet the Christians of Alexandria and at Rome, on account of some ancient tradition, have ceased to do this." So in the 4th century, here's a writer in the church saying that throughout the world, people are gathering together on the Sabbath, Saturday, not on Sunday, but the Christians in Alexandria and in Rome, because of some ancient tradition, are now observing Sunday. Isn't that interesting?
Very interesting.
So for the first 3-4 centuries, the early church met on Sabbath. On Saturday.
That's right.
So that's like, oh my goodness. Now, Solozman, who was an early 5th century Catholic historian, let me read a quote to you from him. "The people of Constantinople and almost everywhere assembled together on the Sabbath as well as on the first day of the week." So as you move into the 5th century, now remember, it's in the 3rd century that Constantine told the church, quit meeting on Sabbath, start meeting on Sunday. But this historian, Catholic historian, is writing in the early 5th century, and he's saying that all around the church world, people are meeting on Sunday, but they're also gathering together on Saturday.
That's right.
So here's...
And he has that right, too, where he says on the first day, as well as on the first day of the week, because it is, keep the 7th day is what Adonai... Elyon, what he blessed the seventh day.
Which
That's
is
what
Saturday.
it is, which is Saturday.
And the first day.
And they have it right there. And the first day of the week is Sunday, which separates it completely from what God said is the 7th day, and what people are now saying is the Sabbath for them.
So what happened is the early Christians for 300 years met on Sabbath, which was Saturday, and they met in the synagogue.
That's right.
And then when the church took this turn, this radical Gentilizing, and rejected everything Jewish, then Constantine and the council said, look, we cannot celebrate the holidays, and we will not celebrate on Sabbath. We're going to turn Sunday to our day of worship. And many Christians say Sunday is our Sabbath. Well, it can't be.
No.
Because Sabbath is seventh day.
That's right.
It's Saturday. You can't say, well, my Saturday is Sunday. No, God said you honor my day, the Sabbath day, and that's Saturday. But what happened was the heads of the church said, let's separate it.
That's right.
And they were going to put tremendous pressure and told their priests and leaders, you got to meet on Sunday.
That's right.
But what did the people do? They met on Sunday because they have to, but they also were meeting on Sabbath for nearly 2 centuries after that.
That's right. It took a long time to get that out of them.
Come on, it took a long time to get that out of them before you could finally get them to leave Sabbath and just have Sunday.
That's right.
Why was that? Because those people had an understanding that we are grafted into God's people, Israel.
That's
We're
right.
grafted into the root of Israel, and that somehow the common people kind of understood. We don't want to do that.
Right. That's
Amen?
right.
So once that happens, it took a long time to get Sabbath out of the church.
That's right.
In fact, listen to this. This is a Council of Nicaea in the year 787. Now we're over 700 years
after Yeshua.
That's twice as long as the United States has been around.
That's right.
Over 700 years after the church was founded.
That's right.
The Council of Nicaea said, quote, those who openly or secretly keep the Sabbath and follow other practices in the manner of the Jews are not to be received into communion, nor into prayer, nor into the church. Now, why would the council have to make that statement?
Right.
They wouldn't have made that statement if there were a dozen people still keeping Sabbath in the church, which by then had 1 million people.
No.
They wouldn't have been making that declaration if even it had been 100 in this country or that country. All throughout the church world, there was a minority. It was a minority by now, but it was a significant and vocal
enough. That's right.
Minority that the Council of Nicaea.
And if Yeshua were walking on the earth during that time, he would have been in that minority. he would not have been with the Council of Nicaea.
That's right. And so here's the church leadership, the council, and they are afraid of the Sabbath movement.
Yes, they are.
They are afraid of the Jewish roots connection.
That's right.
And they therefore have said we are going to excommunicate anybody who openly or secretly is keeping the Sabbath or following the practices of the Jews. That meant eating kosher.
Right.
That might have meant wearing a tallit, wearing tzitzit, observing Sabbath, observing tabernacles.
That's right.
Anything like that.
That's right. Praying 3 times a day.
Right. If we see you doing that, you no longer can be considered a member of the church. Now, that is 700 years after the beginning of the church. It's 400 years after the Christians were told, don't do that.
That's right.
And yet for 400 years, this very strong minority gained its voice.
That's right.
And now what's happening in the body of Christ today, as we said, there's a reawakening of that.
That's right.
And people say, have you become Jewish? No, we've just become connected.
To our roots.
To our roots.
That's right. We're grafted in. We finally found out what we're actually grafted into.
That's right. And who we really are.
Right. And where our life force comes from.
That's right. And so when we ask that question, well, how do Gentiles fit into the roots? Well, Gentiles fit into the roots by going back and finding out, well, what does the Bible say?
That's right.